Welcome back. Today we're making this delicious golden lavender cake. This video is sponsored by Domino Sugar, and Domino Sugar's golden sugar is the star ingredient in this recipe. But before we start to make our frosting and our batter, we actually need to make some lavender milk. So we're taking 3/4 of a cup of whole milk that we brought to a simmer, and we're adding 1 tablespoon of dried culinary lavender. We're giving that a quick stir just to help that lavender really get mixed into the milk, and we're gonna let this steep for about 15 minutes. This allows the milk to really absorb all that delicious lavender flavor. And once it's been 15 minutes, we pour our lavender milk through a metal sieve. So this catches all of our bits of lavender to leave us with some delicious lavender milk that we're gonna use in both our cake batter and our frosting. So we'll set this aside for a minute while we start to work on our cake batter. We're adding 3 cups of cake flour into the bowl of our stand mixer, along with 3 cups of Domino Sugar Golden Sugar. Then we're adding in 1 teaspoon of salt, along with 2½ teaspoons of baking powder. Now that our dry ingredients are in our bowl, we're going to mix it on a low speed just to help get them incorporated together with our paddle attachment. You can also make this recipe with a whisk attachment. Next, we're mixing in 1 cup of unsalted butter that's at room temperature. I like to do this in 2 phases just to make it easier to get that butter mixed in. This method is called reverse crumbing, where we're adding our butter into all of our dry ingredients. And I really love it because it's a super easy method to follow, and it also makes super tender cake layers. Once all of our butter is mixed in, it's time to work on our wet ingredients. So first we're mixing in 1 cup of pasteurized egg whites, or about 7 whole fresh egg whites, followed by 1 cup of sour cream and 1/2 cup of lavender milk. So some tips as you're doing this: make sure you mix on a low speed so you don't overwork the batter and so it doesn't splatter. Our final ingredients that we're adding in are 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and 1/8 of a cup of vegetable oil. We're also adding in a tiny bit of purple gel food coloring to give our cake layers a beautiful purple color. Once our batter is nice and smooth and evenly colored, we're going to prepare our cake pans. So I'm lining 4 7-inch cake pans with some parchment rounds, spraying them with some nonstick spray, and then filling them evenly. We're going to bake these for about 40 minutes in an oven that is preheated to 325 degrees. Next, it's time to make our golden lavender Swiss meringue buttercream. We're adding 7 fresh egg whites into the stand of our mixing bowl, along with 2 cups of Domino Sugar Golden Sugar. We're giving this a quick whisk to help get that sugar incorporated into the egg whites, and then it's time to heat things up. I've brought about 1 inch of water to a simmer here, and we're placing our mixing bowl directly on top of the pot. Then I'm continuously stirring this mixture for about 3 minutes until our sugar has dissolved. There's 2 ways to know if your mixture is ready. You can either take a little bit between your fingers and rub it, and it should be nice and smooth with no sugar granules, or you can use an instant thermometer, and you want your mixture to be at 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Once my mixture reached that temperature, I put it back on my stand mixer and whisked it on high for 10 minutes until I created a meringue that had stiff peaks. By this point in time, the temperature of my bowl had cooled down to room temperature, and it was time to start incorporating our butter. So I'm adding in 2 cups of unsalted room temperature butter, 1 tablespoon at a time. It's a lot easier to incorporate your butter into your meringue if you add it in slowly. I was super happy with the way my frosting turned out. It was silky smooth and nice and fluffy, but we still had to add in a few more ingredients. Before doing that, I like to scrape the sides and the bottom of my bowl with a rubber spatula and then mix it 1 more time for a couple minutes just to make sure that everything is properly incorporated. Then we're adding in 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and 1/4 cup of our lavender milk. We're going to mix this on a really low speed just because we don't want any of that precious lavender milk splashing out of our bowl. And partway through, I like to pause and scrape the sides of the bowl 1 more time just to make sure everything is getting mixed together. After 1 more stir on a low speed, I actually like to switch from my whisk attachment to my paddle attachment. This helps make our frosting super smooth, which will make it a lot easier to get smooth sides on our cake. The final step is optional, but I like to add a tiny bit of purple gel food coloring to make our base frosting a very light shade of purple. So at this point in time, our frosting is silky smooth and has a wonderful texture. We're going to set it aside before we add it to our cake. Next, we're going to prep our cake layers. I like to use a serrated knife to trim off the caramelization on the side of our cake layers, as well as to level the top. This is totally optional, but it makes it a lot easier to stack your cake. And then it's time to actually assemble our cake. So I'm taking about 1 tablespoon of our frosting here and spreading it in the center of our grease-proof cake board, just to help keep our first cake layer in place as we stack and assemble our cake. I've added a generous layer of our golden lavender Swiss meringue buttercream onto our cake layer, and I'm smoothing it using my large offset spatula. So I'm repeating this process as I work my way up the cake, and you can see this frosting is just so silky smooth and wonderful to work with. Once all my cake layers were stacked, I added a thin layer of frosting all the way around the cake just to help trap in any crumbs. This is called a crumb coat, and once I had smoothed it using my bench scraper, I chilled the cake in the freezer for about 10 minutes. You can also put this in the fridge for about 30 minutes. The goal is to get that layer of frosting firm to the touch before adding a second, thicker layer of frosting. I like to start by adding a lot of frosting to the top and slowly working my way down the sides. Once I had evenly covered my cake with this next layer of frosting, I smoothed it using my bench scraper one more time and then used my small offset spatula to clean up that top edge. I chilled the cake again in the freezer for about 10 minutes before adding on some green buttercream around the base. I divided my remaining frosting into 7 bowls and colored it 3 different shades of green, 2 different shades of purple, a pink, and also a yellow. So I used some small piping bags to pipe grass along the base of my cake, and then I piped some longer stalks up the side of my cake to be the lavender. So I'm using my darkest shade of purple here and piping just some tiny little dots on top of that green frosting to look like lavender. And then we're using our remaining frosting to pipe some wildflowers into our grass. So I'm making kind of a spiral motion with my frosting, and I'm not being too precise with this because in a minute we're going to actually fill the center of it with some yellow frosting. As I do this, I also like to swirl just so it kind of blends together and almost looks like a painting. And just like that, our golden lavender cake is complete. So now it's time to cut in and do a quick little taste test. So of course I had to use a matching purple knife, and I'm happy to say that this cake tastes absolutely delicious. The lavender mixed with the hints of molasses from the golden sugar are just to die for. You can learn more about Domino Golden Sugar by visiting www.dominosugar.com. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you again soon.